And you are live.
Thank you. So we'll call this meeting of the task force to session. Thank you all for taking the time. August, I know, is a crazy time where people are doing lots of things. So I hope everyone's having a wonderful summer for the purpose of record keeping. It looks like every member of the task force is here, which is wonderful, along with Eileen Leahy from the board. So this is great. We have a good attendance tonight. I think we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what's coming in from the findings. I hope you're able to all take a look at that. It was super exciting from my perspective, the amount of responses we got, which is encouraging. But before we do that, the first business would be, thank you, Scott, for putting together those minutes for the last time we met. And if everyone's had a chance to review them, I'd be happy to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of July 12th, I believe.
I move to approve the minutes from the July 12 meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Scott, for continuing to put together those great minutes. I appreciate it. Cool. So Eileen, you want to talk a little bit about sort of what we have on the agenda here? I think since we met last, in addition to sort of the items there was a number of questions that we sort of took to the Office of Law for some feedback on things that were discussed back at the work session. And I think there's some probably clarity on some of those questions as well. But yeah,
Do you want to cover those questions first or the questionnaire first?
Let's dig into the questionnaire a little bit and take a look
right.
yeah.
Well, I was thrilled with the first week of having 474 responses. Of course, it dwindled down to 25 the second week. So I don't have any updates from this week. Sean Wappler, who has been great in MIT with assisting us, is on vacation this week. So I sent out what we had up until, I think, August 4th. And I know that I touched base with Mitchell Stevenson, and she's been sending some more things out on social media. We had posters go out. I don't know if they were hung, but I distributed them. And there were emails went out. I did ask Hillary if she would send another email out reminding people of the deadline, which is this Friday. So I haven't confirmed with her yet if she's been able to do that, but hopefully if she hasn't, she can get that out tomorrow.
I'm guessing, Eileen, that it went out because Ione Annapolis reposted it today.
Okay, great. Okay. So that's good to know. Mitchell is going to might be looking into seeing if there can be just a little blurb in the Capitol, because I think the bulk of our response really came from the front page article about the task force. The only thing I clarified with Mitchell was that I think it was going out that voters could complete the survey, and I confirmed with her that it's all residents. It wasn't just limited to registered voters. So that's good news. We have quite a few comments that I've sent out to Andrew and Faye on the subcommittee. Have also have them, and we'll be looking at grouping them together. Overall, most of them were positive. Some people, I think the most controversial question was the one about the 16-year-olds. There were some questions about why wasn't nonpartisan included on there, which we kind of hid in terms of how we framed the primary question. Number of people brought up ranked choice voting, which can be used for nonpartisan. And that was about it. The difference between week 1 and week 2, granted, it was a big difference in terms of numbers, but it pretty much was the same way. So she'll be getting some more data out. She did ask for the task force to let her know if we want to have her break it down, like by wards or what other filters we might want. And so I'm kind of throwing that out to you all. I mean, I am keeping in mind that it's not a scientific survey, so I don't know how much analysis we want to try and do, but that's really up to you all in terms of what you would like to see.
you're saying she could, obviously she did the distribution of sort of where the responses came from by ward. I saw in the thing you shared yesterday, but like,
Right.
you know, more on the crosstabs of different
She can
questions.
break it down some more. I don't know exactly what parameters she can break it down to. I can ask her, but do you all just want to go with what she's given us so far? Or do you want to break it down some more?
Anybody got thoughts about it? Scott?
I thought what she gave was great. I mean, I thought it was at the right level.
Mhm. Andrew, Faye, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was fine as well. I concur with Scott.
Mhm. I was kind of, oh, I'm sorry, Faye.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm having some technical difficulties. I apologize. But I'm fine with it. Yeah.
So I was somewhat struck by, there's no split hairs. Everything seems to be pretty much a majority, even among Republicans and Democrats, and also with independents. So I figured I can get the additional data out to you by the 23rd, and then maybe we can dig into it a little bit more if you want. Because realizing I don't necessarily want to put too much information out since it is still ongoing.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting sort of level of response and interesting results we're starting to see. So thank you for all of you who put a lot of work into that to get that to a position where it could be fielded like this. So it's awesome.
Good. And we did get one mailed in survey. So Regina sent that to me, and I haven't forwarded it to Sean yet, but I'll have her put that in. Okay,
That's great. Okay. So unless sort of other questions, it sounds like we'll probably spend a good deal of time on the next meeting in 2 weeks and sort of really digging into that. And, I definitely want to flag, thank you, Scott, for doing sort of the first cut of putting together the framework of what a report would look like and how we can start to think about the questions that will need to be settled. And sort of, I think as far as your sort of initial framing of it, makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you for doing that sort of hard work to get us rolling. So I appreciate it. So Eileen, I know you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about some of the follow-up questions about the makeup of boards of elections and some of the stuff that we came out of those discussions at our last meeting.
Right. I just wanted to follow up. I don't know, maybe just being the type A oldest daughter, I had written down that I was supposed to check into this. So I scrambled yesterday and did some looking into it. This was in response to the concept of expanding the board from 3 people to 5, and how would we go about doing it? Much to my surprise, our code is the most clear, believe it or not. I looked at, 16 towns and cities in the state of Maryland. I did not have the chance to check with clerks to find out if there was just something that wasn't on web pages. So this is all gleaned from web pages. Most of the cities and towns have 3 as they're on their board of elections. They're called Board of Elections, Board of Supervisors of Elections. There's various titles. The city of Tacoma Park has a varied one. It has up to 7, and their terms are 3 years and staggered. They're appointed by the city council. And I thought this was interesting. They note that they make every effort to have representation from all 6 of their wards. So that might be something to consider in terms of trying to have an overall, more representation. I think right now we're all in different wards. I'm in 1, Debbie Essex in 5, and Keanu is in 3. So, and I know there is usually an effort to spread that out. Other 2 large cities, Frederick has 3, city of Salisbury has 3, but their term is 6 years and staggered. Town of Highland Beach is 3, they have 4 years. City of Aberdeen is, they have 3 on their board and 4 years. None of these talk about how they select them. For the most part, there's only one. Let's see, Frederick and Salisbury make a notation that no more than 2 can be from the same party. So the assumption is they probably do it from the majority party, and then the third one is from the minority. The city of Bowie, interestingly enough, has 9 and 4 alternates, and their term is 2 years. However, the city of the city of Bowie appears to run their own elections completely. And I think that's why they have so many, because my guess is they probably function also a little bit more in the day today. Another thing that was different in, let's see if it's Easton. In Easton has 1 person on their board of elections, but they have 3 people on their board of canvassers, which is interesting. So the way it works for the city of Annapolis is the 3 people who are on the Board of Supervisors of Elections, when we go to canvass, they close as the board and then they become the Board of Canvassers and stay as the Board of Canvassers until the canvass is over. I couldn't find much more information about that. Rockville has 5 people. Most of these towns, with the exception of Frederick and Salisbury and Highland Park, they all have their elections administered by the counties. It looks like Bowie is the only one that runs their own. Rockville runs their own, but with the assistance of Montgomery County like we do. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I was hoping to get a little bit more information in terms of the selection process. I did try to go look and do a little bit more research, and I did send out that article about the selection of local officials, which I thought was interesting, that many of them are appointed, but many of them are elected also. So if you haven't, you probably haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but you might want to take a look and see what that is in terms of more of a national level. But I couldn't find too much in terms of municipalities. So the bad news is there wasn't much out there to assist us, but the good news is I guess we can kind of make it up ourselves.
And it
Any
seems like,
questions or
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
just question? Anybody have questions?
Oh, great. I thought Scott was jumping in. Yeah, so I mean, it seems to me like, obviously, if we're certainly thinking about maybe going with the county as the recommendation, obviously that might sort of impact what the scope of what we would be proposing in the city, if there were to be any changes or not, because
Right.
obviously a more formalized dynamic like that would be
It
certainly
dawned on
different
me,
responsibilities.
it dawned on me, if we continue with the county, particularly if we do go into sinking in with a presidential or other election year, it really takes away a lot of the other things that need to be done. Certainly, if the county is really going to be running most of it, keeping it at 3 would probably be fine. The thought about moving it to 5 was to allow more independence, which you could still do with 3, possibly, do one of each, large groups. It was partly to spread out the work a little bit, because particularly as we get close to elections, it does get a little crazy. But it is something to think about. And again, looking at the answers to the questionnaire and looking at the thought of syncing, a lot of different things would just fall into place differently, and may not need to get into some of the depth we're thinking we might want to go into.
Thank you. Scott?
I have 2 questions. One, Eileen, to follow up on what you said. How much of the work is campaign finance related, though? Because there's the county administering the election, and then there's the finance system. I'm just curious, how much of it is the review of the financial reports Because that could stay, I think,
right.
if the county administered the system.
I mean, that's a lot of it because they come in quickly. To be very honest, as we get towards the election, we end up just doing it because we have to meet more often. For instance, because we're doing it with the county, there are many times we are mandatory to go up to the county, for instance, to monitor the calibration of the machines, to clarify the ballots. So, I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 dates for each election that we have to be up in Glen Burnie as a board to do some work. And to be honest, we do a lot of the campaign stuff reports looking at it then. But you're right, it does take up a bit. And it could be outsourced, but I think, as I've mentioned before, when it was outsourced before, it really didn't do as well. Again, if we sync with the county, they'll be using the state system. So that's something to think about.
Oh, I thought that was, maybe I misunderstood. I thought that was separate. I thought there was a possibility that we could sync with the county, but still not be allowed in the state system.
My guess is it could go
I
either
mean,
way.
I'm a
Not
huge
within
fan
a-
of the state system.
Right.
I would definitely advocate for doing it if we could. It's
Right.
a really great system.
Yeah, I thought that, he said that we could, still use their system. They could give us a portal into the state system, even if we didn't go with them completely.
Right. And they would have to adjust some of the things as far as limits on campaigns and things like that. But I think they can do that. The problem we had the last time was because we were still going to be completely independent. We couldn't go to portal. We couldn't just piggyback onto their system. We had to go with a different system and then pay for our own maintenance, and the cost was just too high. And also they're getting ready to redo a lot of their technology. So there may actually be more opportunities once they upgrade.
My other question was, we had mentioned asking MML to come to a meeting to talk about how different cities have done this, or whether or not they had like already a white paper on municipal elections. Did we hear back from MML?
No, I reached out to Jim Peck after we met last, and I have not heard back from him, but I definitely will.
We reached out with the Charter Commission, and there are some things. I think the most recent that I found was 2018. Their big message usually is nonpartisan.
Yeah.
That's kind of where they're encouraging us to become nonpartisan.
Then I think I'll close the loop on something from the last meeting. We had talked about it, Andrew, I think you had asked for some survey on municipalities in Maryland and how many candidates they're drawing. A couple of those questions, and I said I would do it, but then we talked about MML maybe having it, so I stopped. So I guess I'm just telling the group that I will now go ahead and do that for the next meeting.
Yeah, and I'm since I'd already sort of tried to have a conversation with him. We talked to Jim Peck early on in the process about sort of if you wanted to come in, but I mean, there's other folks there at MML who might be more plugged into what's happening now. But yeah, Scott, I mean, I'm happy to connect offline and we can make sure we make the same request or whatever's easiest, but that sounds good.
One of the things that I noticed or just want to comment on in going through the codes and all these other towns and cities, they all seem to pretty much have the same format and the same language. I was hoping to pick up something new or to find a newer template. I did not go back and look at Municicode. I think they just update. They don't necessarily rewrite, but I can continue looking for that to see if that's helpful.
And I think what I was thinking as I kind of survey quickly to do this, you're right. Most of them, it's going to be the same election style because it's nonpartisan. Most of them don't have a 2-stage. It's just you're on the ballot. There's one election day. But maybe we could get a sense of how many candidates it's drawing. Because I do know one of the concerns is that if we change the way you get onto the ballot, that all of a sudden you have like 20 people running and somebody wins with very little support.
Right. Well, one of the interesting things was I didn't see, and again, I wasn't looking for it, but nothing popped out at me is how they handle their nonpartisans. Are they doing, I didn't see any ranked choice. Except maybe Tacoma Park.
I think Tacoma Park is the only one that does ranked choice.
So it wasn't clear as far as a runoff. Now, there was nonpartisan election legislation drafted a few years ago. And in that legislation, which didn't get to the city council, it talked about basically if somebody, I can look it up, but it was basically a runoff situation. They did go into the primaries. Now, one of the questions that had been raised at the last meeting was, can an unaffiliated candidate run in a primary? And I did talk with Ashley Leonard about that, and she said her reading of the code says no. So that's something that needs to be considered with the present code. If we want to try to open up the primary, it would still be Dem, Republican, and then the independent would be on the general election.
Yeah, we would have to redefine it to be a.
Right.
I think there's a new term for it, but back when I was in school, it was the jungle primary.
Right, and we could do that, but the way the code exists now, that's how it would work.
Yeah.
So.
I also realized I just said one of those phrases that makes me sound like an old man back when I was in school.
Sad but true.
Hey, I'm pre-computer, so I'm in the dark ages, so.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I thought her response about that was really just sort of very, that it would be hard to, you'd have to basically take apart the whole system to be able to get to a different process, that instead of sort of, that whole question of like, is there an avenue within there for unaffiliated voters to find themselves on the ballot other than as a write-in? This was really where she landed, right?
Right.
Eileen, you want to talk about the other issue that we went back and forth with Ashley about, the whole question of how could a ballot question be put on, and did the council have the authority to send something, a ballot question, like, which obviously
Right.
contemplated might be a good thing. But
Her reading is no. She initially thought maybe that when during the charter revision, but she did a little more digging because it's not clear in our code. So she went to the state code. I'm trying to think of where I put that. Basically, her reading is that the state legislature says that counties can do it, but there's no mention of municipalities being able to do it. And there's multiple references to the counties doing it. And so her reading is, since the legislature did not include the municipalities, that it may have been their intent not to include them. So at this juncture, she said no, she didn't see a way in which that could be done. So we could go back to having signatures. So certainly somebody could do that. It was helpful, I think, in the survey. I think people are pretty open to open primaries. Again,
yeah.
The open primary kind of was the hidden option for having a nonpartisan.
Sure.
So.
Andrew and then Scott.
I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So the other pathway for getting a ballot question on right, and I think you might have mentioned this, is through like signatures from Annapolis citizens. For my own edification, is there specification? It's a two-part question. Is there specification in the code right now specific to Annapolis that states the number of signatures needed to get a ballot question on? And then if we do go with the state code, my understanding is that it's like 3% for like a statewide ballot question. And I could be wrong about this, but it's like 3% of the either like registered voters or something to that effect. So it would be like 60,000 people statewide. If we go with the state code, will we effectively be adopting that for ballot questions where we just need 3% of the population, roughly 1,200 Annapolis residents, to put a ballot question on? Is that, am I understanding that right?
Regina, help me with this. So the answer is no, it's not a specific number in the code. So when this question was asked a few years ago, Ashley went and looked at what the state required. And I believe the state required like 25% of the registered voters. It was a much higher. So for some reason, 8,000 signatures is in my head. Now, I certainly am happy to go verify that. But at the time when we had people that were interested in doing it, the number was quite high. So in the absence of it being in the code, my understanding was that we could proceed with what the state said. Now, of course, we could possibly look into having the city council change that in the interim. Again, it's becoming unclear to me sometimes what will eventually need state legislation in addition to council legislation or in place of it. So I can certainly ask for a more specific reading from Ashley.
Just to clarify, right? I mean, the question that was posed to her was, can the city council act the same way a county council does and refer something to the ballot, right? And she's like,
Right.
yeah, no, it's only the citizens' ability to sort of collect signatures to get on the ballot. The question of what that number would be in the city, if there's something in the code or their reading of what the state code is another question, which I'm sure they should be able to. Regina should be able to turn around real fast. I mean, I think anecdotally, there has been efforts in the last 15, 20 years from citizen groups to sort of launch an initiative around that, and a lot of them have fizzled out just because they thought the number was high of what you had to get of registered voters in the city
Right.
to be able to
And
qualify.
then you have to verify everything. And so the question then became, did we have the means to verify all of them? But if that part's in code, so we would need to.
But the core question of what the threshold is would be very helpful because theoretically we could recommend that as a path, right? But it would obviously be a much bigger lift for all involved than if the clerk, if the city attorney believed the council had the ability to do that under state law, which she does not.
So if you give me a few minutes, I'll look it up. I have the state summary guide in front of me. I'll see if I can find it.
Scott, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I had a question, and I'm just struggling to remember. Is the ballot question process in the city of Annapolis open to it being an initiative or a referendum? In other words, can it be a citizen putting an idea on the ballot or a question on the ballot, or does it have to be in response to an act that the city council took that a citizen's trying to petition to have the electorate decide, reject or affirm the decision of the city council?
No, a citizen can do it because it was a citizens group that asked us about it before.
Okay.
And I don't remember that being an issue at all.
But Scott's question is a good one, right? Like if it's the example it often around is like a tax cap sort of situation, right? Like it's responding to the council raising taxes. So there is it's directly related to an action of the council. Does it need that threshold, or could it just be a citizen group wants a new policy that's never been contemplated by the elected officials and could be put in place? I get your question, right? There's a distinction.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Which
I
one
guess
is it, or is it open?
Right. You could, you don't need a ballot question to decide about nonpartisan. You could go to the city council and say, our recommendation is we have a nonpartisan election. We ask for, it gets 2 people to sponsor it, and it can go through the regular process. What happened in the last time that nonpartisan was drawn up was the person that requested it I don't know if he just didn't put it forth or he didn't get a second sponsor. I don't know what the backstory was, but I do know that, and the part of the difficulty at the time was the legislation was drafted outside of any input, or the Board of Supervisors of Elections didn't even know about it until it came up, but it didn't get to the council itself. So I'm trying to find this. So, okay.
Yeah, I did not think state law in Maryland created the ability to petition a new topic onto the ballot. I thought it was to pull an act. This is state law, though. I mean, to pull an act of the General Assembly onto the ballot. And I just want to make sure that we're not somehow missing a detail.
Oh, well, maybe while Eileen's looking it up, I can read what I found on Ballotpedia. So I'm not sure if it's it's not an official source, but what they say is, and it makes that distinction, Scott, that you're talking about. So it says in Maryland, the number of signatures needed to place a referendum on the ballot is equal to 3% of the
Okay.
total number of votes cast for the governor in the preceding election. The requirement for veto referendums on local law is equal to 10% of the total number of votes cast for the governor. So it sounds like if that's right, it would be different.
It's a much lower. Yeah. And it may be that that's been a change. I mean, we looked at this probably 5 years ago. I mean, if you go to the city code and want to look at what the current ballot questions for us, so 3%, it said 3% of, see that was, now I'm remembering that was an issue too, because you couldn't go by 3% of what I'll double check with Ashley because she did look it up. I don't recall there was something about how would we figure it out because of the votes for the governor, since this was a municipality.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, they should be able to calculate what the turnout was in the last gubernatorial election in the city, right? And that your 3% number.
They probably
would
could,
take
yeah.
that out. Yeah.
But then it would be, well, I guess it would still be about the same number. The challenge becomes when you're calculating that, because our wards don't line up completely with with their precincts, and it should make a big difference. But
Yeah, you have the
county precincts will,
split precincts.
county precincts include city and non-city
Yep.
residents. So I'm looking at, Scott, what was your specific question about the ballots? Because I'm looking at the code.
So it's whether it allows for initiative. And Andrew, I just reread, I was on Ballotpedia reading that. I think the distinction there is it's 3% is the standard for a statewide referendum, and the 10% is for local law. So I think if you're trying to repeal an act of the Anne Arundel County Council, for example, it's 10% of voters. But if you're trying to repeal an act of the General Assembly, it's 3%. Because higher, and again, this is with the caution that Ballotpedia
Right.
is not necessarily the most reliable source. I don't know what its reliability is.
Right. So if it's 10% of registered voters, it's almost 3,000.
Well, it's 10% of registered voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election.
Oh, okay. So we'd have to get that number.
Yeah,
They
10% of the
should be
number of
more.
votes cast in the governor's election.
Well, I mean, if you all
But
want.
it does say earlier on in the chapter that Maryland does not have the power of the initiative, which would suggest that something could only get onto the ballot as a question if it was in response to a city council action.
Right.
But theoretically, yeah.
Do our
These are all
charter
good questions,
amendments
actually. Yeah.
go to the voter?
No, they've been passed by the city council.
Yeah. Just has a different threshold, right? Of what they have to do, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, changing anything in the election code, changing from partisan and nonpartisan, the council at some point long ago created partisan elections, right? You're changing an action of the council. Like, does it have to be in recent time frame, right? To be like you're responding. I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot of gray to get into, but hopefully Ashley can figure
Yeah.
out a
So
better answer than.
do you all, do you all want to ask Ashley to come to the next meeting to clarify it, or I can give her a heads up and say, this is what we're looking at. Can she look at what the current law is and the current numbers and see if she can come up with a number that would be needed?
I'm happy to follow up on that email thread we had with her about
Okay,
whether the council had the ability to do it, and then say, okay, let's get into the logistics of how the voters would do it and what are the numbers, what are the thresholds, and does it need to be? Yeah, so I'm happy to try to do that if that's helpful.
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't have more up-to-date information. And then the only other thing I see on my plate that I can remember and update, correct me if I'm wrong, is I have started looking at the contrast between city and state code. So I should have that for the next meeting. Looking at the differences.
Okay, thank you, Eileen. Other thoughts or anything else anyone wants to kind of discuss or get into that's come up from thinking about the survey or any of these questions, to make sure we have some items we can follow up on in advance of seeing the full survey results?
Can I ask a question about the survey? For question 3, were they able to select more than one answer?
Remind me which one that is.
Voting methods. Which voting method should be used in the City of Annapolis elections?
I think it says check all that apply. Check all or check. Does it say anything next to it?
Doesn't say it on the sheet you gave me, but I'm assuming yes, because otherwise the math doesn't make sense.
I believe it did. I'll look it up.
Okay, thanks.
Should have been burned in my head, but. So this is how would you like to vote in 2025? Is that the question?
Yeah. Which voting method should be used in the City of Annapolis elections?
I'm looking at an earlier version. It says pick one. Let me go back. Yes, it's all that apply.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
I don't know if that's something she can filter out if you wanted to know how many people just picked. I don't know if she can do that as far as how many people picked one, how many people picked 2 versus 3 or something.
I mean, I was just casually surprised how popular in-person voting was. So
Mhm.
Okay. A lot of these survey tools, it's pretty easy to see the cross tab, which will allow you to see, like, if they picked this, did they also pick others? Like,
Right.
that breaks down. If it's not too hard, because this was a pick more than one, I think for this question, it would be really helpful.
Okay.
I mean, my gut is that most people that selected in-person voting, it's because it's traditional, and a solid number also said, I'd like to vote by mail, either by being able to request it or automatic.
So I don't have much knowledge of the populations like across ward, but as of now, we have, I think, more than twice as many responses from Ward 1 than any other ward. Is Ward 1 like more populous than these other wards, or do we just have a much higher response rate from that ward? Does anybody happen to know the roughly the population? They should be equal, right? Because of the redistricting, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I mean, the short answer is like, they're all about the same. Ward 1 has obviously very active civic groups that I think probably disseminated this. So, Ward 1 Resident Association, all those sort of things, they're sort of not the same way in other wards, that probably the tools of how it got in people's inbox is probably more effective, I would
Right.
think.
I mean, I live in Ward 1 and I got three hits. Interestingly enough, I didn't get anything from the Ward 1 Residents Association. It does follow, and I can get that for the next meeting if you want. To me, it followed the pattern of turnout for voting. Pretty much, pretty much followed that. So it kind of didn't surprise me. One hope that all the aldermen got their alderpersons got it out to their constituents, but again, that's a finite number too, and not hitting everybody. I did try to get posters out to at least one in every ward. So.
Great. Other thoughts, questions, any sort of feedback on any of this? So we'll do some follow-up on some of these questions in advance of the next thing. I think it's not on the agenda, but that the other sort of issue probably to revisit is really mapping out the following couple sessions, right? I mean, I think we're sort of pretty quickly up against our deadline in September. So the question is sort of how to think about this meeting that, coming up in August. Do we want to in September do another in-person work session like we did before, when we're at the point where we're probably going to be taking votes on some of these sort of key provisions? Is there value in doing that in a room versus doing it on Zoom? I'm curious what y'all think. I think that would make some sense to me, but and then obviously sort of the period of sort of writing the final report and putting those recommendations together with all the sort of the great template that's already started. But let me know what you think on those kind of questions. But I mean, ideally, right? I think Eileen, right, our initial date is sort of late September, right?
Yes, I think our first meeting was March 22nd, and the resolution reads 6 months from the first meeting. Now, if you want to request more time, you can do that. I don't know if there's enough time to get it through.
Yeah, speaking for myself, I would like to see us be able to see if we can sort of land.
I mean, I would check with Regina and or Hillary. Yes, we could finish on the 22nd. That doesn't mean the writing has to necessarily be done, but
the recommendations are finalized. Yeah.
Right. Any sort of vote or any sort of group meeting would have to end by then, and then the submission could be. There doesn't say anything in there when the report has to be presented. I can double check that.
Thank you, Scott.
Like I said, this is just an initial draft that I've been starting to put together, and everybody's thoughts should be incorporated, but it might be helpful if we put together a subcommittee on drafting. So, we really shouldn't be batting around drafts, deliberating them by email, but we can have a subcommittee to just have more voices working in the framing of the draft. I think that would probably be helpful. I don't know if anybody particularly wanted to do that. I mean, I'm envisioning that the subcommittee would be able to just circulate by email, because the subcommittee wouldn't be subject to Open Meetings Act and would be less than a quorum, but another set of eyes looking at it and helping refine it by the time it gets to the larger group would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to help with that. I guess what I'm envisioning it would be at some point in early September, trying to find another time to do an in-person meeting like we did, where we can really say that, these are sort of the, 8 or 10 potential recommendations we're going to make, and let's discuss them and vote on them in a public setting. And then the drafting of the thing could be, because you're not deciding anything new, you're sort of, you've done that all in a public setting. I think sort of how you draft it and who touches the copy is less relevant when the decisions have already been made, it seems.
Yeah.
But
I meant, and maybe I'm overthinking it. I was even thinking about all the background and the summary of the process, which I just think is important, so that way the document stands on its own and somebody can
Yep.
read it and kind of follow the full thought.
Andrew.
Slightly shifting gears here, but Eileen, you mentioned something interesting when you're talking there. It sounded like, and I didn't know this, it sounded like there has been drafts of, or like bills proposed, I guess, in committee or wherever to go nonpartisan for the elections, but they never made it to the full council.
Mhm.
Did I understand that right? Or
Yes, there's been talk, I mean, each charter for the past 3 charter revision commissions have recommended nonpartisan. And so I believe after the last one, not this past one, before that, there had been a number of people that had been proposing that it be put forth to the council. So I don't know what happened to it. I just know that the Board of Elections was, Board of Supervisors of Elections was made aware of it, but it didn't go, it never got to the council, was never introduced. And I don't know the reason why that alder person didn't.
Are you talking in this last round, this very last round?
Oh, no, this was a few years ago. This was before the last election.
Because I thought Alderman Payon offered one this last round and it failed to get a second on first reader and died. And I thought Alderman Israel had offered one in the past.
I think he may have also done, I don't know if Alderman Payon's ever got even yeah, I don't know if it was, I'm not clear if it was introduced or not.
Who were you thinking of, Eileen? No, you were.
It was Alderman Payon.
Okay.
It did. It died on first reader. It failed to get a second, and so it didn't even move to second reader.
Right, I think
So the
some of,
office of law should have it then if they drafted it. It's ready to drop.
it was drafted, but it was incomplete. I mean, so, you know, it took one part of it in terms of how you would do the ballot, but it didn't really take into consideration all the other things that go with putting on an election. So that I think was possibly part of it. I think that the current council is more aware of what a nonpartisan election is, but they still tend to ask, what is it? And again, people think of ranked choice as nonpartisan. And so that's not what I try to explain is you can use ranked choice as a nonpartisan tool, or you can use it as a partisan tool also. And then, you know, as Andrew has pointed out, there are other options, other nonpartisan options too. I believe that Alderman Payon's was a pretty simple one. It was kind of a straight up and down. The top 2 go to the top 2 in the primary go to the general. I believe that was something like that. Scott, I don't know if you have more specifics.
No, I think it was like that. If it wasn't that way, then it was the reverse of you have one election, and if nobody gets a majority, the top 2 go to a runoff. Right. It was a top 2 system of some kind.
Right.
If the office of law can find Dick Israel's version of it, that would be worth looking at. Because the guy wrote some very smart legislation and very, it would be an interesting take probably on it if it's very thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going back a long time.
Yeah, I'll have to check. I can check with Regina and
Yep.
to even see if it's something that even can be shared.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I forgot what I was looking for. Oh, I was looking for the resolution and I couldn't find it on the website, the full resolution. Let me see.
So just to take everyone's temperature, how does everyone feel about the idea of sort of one more work session?
In person's great. I think we get a lot of work done.
Okay.
I'm fine with it as well.
So if I heard correctly, and we have to be done by the 22nd, we have 2 more naturally occurring meetings. Just following our pattern. I don't know if we want to start talking about other dates.
I stand corrected. So the legislation says the task force shall submit a final report of its recommendations to the city council and the Board of Supervisors of Elections no later than 6 months from the date of its first meeting, at which time the task force shall end unless the city council takes further action to extend the term of the task force. So again, the question could be if you wanted to ask for additional time, or say you wanted to finish meeting the end of September, but be able to submit the report sometime in October. Might be able to do that. Would you like me to check on options?
I mean, I don't know. And let's see what else. I mean, I think, right, like I'm more worried about sort of having the time to discuss what we want to discuss and sort of figure out what recommendations we have the ability to make, right? If that part of it is done in the timeline and the report has gotten to them when it gets to them, I don't think it's like we're not going to consider the report because it's after the 6 months, I mean, but so I'm less worried about going back and asking them to pass something to extend it another, month or something like that, and just see if we can figure out how to get close to that mark if we have the time to make what decisions about what we want to recommend and then how to put it together. I don't know. So
So if I'm understanding right, Ian, are we gonna do an in-person session for our next meeting or the one after? What do you have in mind?
it'd be either way. I mean, we could do it that week, or we could do it whenever the natural occurring one would be, right around before Labor Day or after Labor Day, wherever falls in that time. Probably a little more time just to work with, the folks of the city to secure some space back at Moyer probably would be good. But I'm happy to sort of like think about how we structure the agenda and love all your input of this. I mean, obviously the next meeting will be really digging into the findings, but maybe out of that, there are some things that we can take action on, if we feel like it in advance of sitting down in a work session in early September. But
Now, if you can keep in mind, at a work session, you can't take votes.
Yeah.
So you can't.
I know, but yeah,
And I have down here that right now we have only 2 more meetings. We have August 23rd, and then the second Wednesday in September would be the 12th. So the option could be if you wanted to add some meetings.
yeah, no, I think we probably would. The question is, do you add them before that work session or after, so you can then basically be voting on things that you're kind of discussing, I would think, right? Pretty soon after that. Based on, don't you think? I mean, based on how it went last time, we would really probably discuss a lot of these issues that are coming out in a work
Right.
session, and then have a voting session publicly
Afterwards, yeah.
shortly after that. While it's still fresh and close. So the question is, like, do you keep the 12th as sort of the meeting where you do that, and then try and have something shortly before the 12th for an in-person thing?
I guess
I don't
I think it's the 13th.
Is it the 13th? Okay, you're right.
I think we have a work session between the next meeting and the 13th. And that way we can, have that larger discussion
Yep.
and then vote on the following meeting and finalize that written report. And try to get it in our time if possible.
Sounds good. So Eileen, you and I can follow up, I guess, with Hillary and Regina, whoever we need, about sort of space, and then maybe see what. So I guess I'd ask all of you to take a look at your calendars and stuff and see if there's days that are better than others? I mean, I don't know. I mean, is the 23rd a better time to be, for all of you to be remote like this, or to be in person if it was available to do it then? Would you rather stay on the same schedule and not create another meeting? Or would you're thinking in between the 23rd and the 13th, finding a time to meet in person?
And I'm personally flexible, so whatever you guys decide, I'm down.
If we meet in person on the 23rd, I would just ask that we push to 6:30 because I have a late meeting that day. So I think my plan was probably to have joining from the office as an option. But if we're going to be in person 6:30, I could definitely make it.
Not to complicate things, but I just want to follow up. I think the group had also considered maybe doing a second public hearing. Now, granted, we
Yeah.
could also just promote that certain things are being discussed at these meetings, but I just want to, just follow up that it had been discussed. I'm not saying we have to do it, or I'm neutral.
What's everyone's sense of that? I mean, I know we did say at the beginning when we did the initial public hearing, because there was so little turnout, that this will probably not be the only public hearing we do. Obviously, we've had the survey, but like, what's everyone's appetite to do one of these sessions? And maybe that becomes the 23rd as part of it is a public hearing for people to sign up who want to engage. And then the work session follows that. Then you would have the survey and a public hearing landing, and then sort of early September meet for a work session. I mean, is there utility in doing it that way?
Is the reason why the in-person was done as a work session and not as a public hearing simply because we couldn't accommodate the Zoom viewing? And if that's the case, I'm wondering if you can have a combined public hearing and work session, because I felt like there was a reason why we went to work session that had something to do with the boards and commissions YouTube. And
I mean, I would have to check with Regina, but I think it also is because a public hearing would technically be a meeting. And we did ask Regina if we could have a meeting followed by a work session, and the answer had been negative.
yeah, I thought we pushed to a work session because Pitt Moyer couldn't support a meeting. And it was that we couldn't get council chambers. I don't know if, I know we've got Mark on if.
Yeah, Mark, I saw you come off.
So you can't do a hybrid meeting in Pitt Moyer. So you would need to reserve the council chambers. We do have the ability to bring in people remotely. It's not a smooth or clean process, but it is possible. But the other problem with Pitt Moyer is that the internet connection there is not that stable. There isn't a dedicated line for Zoom meetings there.
Well, thank you, Mark. I mean, that raises an interesting issue of timing here. I mean, the council doesn't meet in August, so all their standing committees aren't using the council chambers. I mean, maybe there is utility in seeing if they would let us do a public meeting in the council chambers where it would be an official meeting and open to the public at some point in August before they come back, after Labor Day.
Mhm.
It couldn't hurt unless they're doing something. They often do stuff in that room, like construction and stuff during the period where the council's not in session, but couldn't hurt.
All meetings are open, but not necessarily a public hearing. And you could, I guess, ask that if people want to attend or testify, that they come in person and not necessarily do a hybrid. Is that true, Mark?
Yes, you can
And then it would be
ask them
recorded.
to attend in person. The remote participation could be on the part of the task force members
Mhm.
or a presenter. But again, we do it in emergency-ish situations. It's not recommended for a good standard solid meeting. So
And
Yeah, I mean, I just support what you're saying, and I think that's a great idea to have have a public session either in the council chambers or somewhere around town. And I think as a preface or preview to that meeting is we want to get out the results of the survey like to the public. I don't know where those would be like appropriately posted or something like that. So, you know, individuals can, you know, speak to us and they can react to those survey results that they like. And I think it will be very successful, especially if we have like the same level of like communications weight behind it and like outreach rate behind it as we did for the survey, considering, you know, we had such a high response rate. I think we would get a pretty solid response in terms of like public attendance relative certainly to our first go at it.
And just Mark, thank you, Andrew. Like, so Mark, just to clarify, so if we were to do a public meeting, right, to allow the public to come testify in the council chambers, if it was available, like the benefit would be, it would be able to be recorded like this, because that technology is there, not at Pitt Moyer, right? So,
Correct.
and so, but even, and if all of us were able to be in person, it would satisfy, it would actually just be a real meeting in person instead of online, but it would be able to be recorded and shared just like this is.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Just be aware, I think there is something that is trying to be scheduled for the 23rd in the council chambers. I don't know that that's definite or not. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about any other events that are scheduled that the TV studio is not involved with.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so Eileen and I can follow up with Regina and Hillary and everybody. And you know, so I mean, we may have to move to a different date to do during that period where their council chambers being used less, which is basically the rest of the month. So you know, I think maybe we see when they have availability and if it is a thing we can do, and then we can come back to everybody and see if it works for your schedule. Hopefully we'll have a couple dates and we can look at it.
I'd like to request that you confirm that date with me before you advertise anything, because people are on vacation and we are somewhat short-staffed. So want to be sure we can cover it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. So if everyone is agreeable to that, let's we can look into that with some of the folks at City Hall and see if it's something we can do, right? But I think if everyone thinks there's some utility in doing a public session, I think it's probably worth trying to do sooner rather than later. Eileen?
I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly. So we're talking about we would meet and then do a public hearing, or the next meeting would be a public hearing?
I think we'd need to be flexible to when they say in an evening that could be noticed. And as Mark says, when there's staff available to make it happen, right? Is there some time before things get busy again? It's early September to try to do this.
I'm just thinking in terms of agenda items. Do we want to meet and discuss the questionnaire results first before presenting them to the public, or do we want to do it all at once?
I say, given the timing, we do it all at once, right? Unless
Yeah, I mean, we may end up getting the responses, oh, you can't do it on the 23rd anyway, so you can do your normal meeting on Zoom and discuss it amongst ourselves and then make it public, however it's going to be, do that, and then ask people to come comment at a certain time and date around then, right? Like, I think,
Okay.
yeah, right, we're not gonna be able to dictate when it might be available or not, but like, I think it's smart to ask and we'll see. I mean, it may not work out, but it's worth.
Okay, I was just trying to get the chronology.
No, but I mean, I guess where I'm looking at, and the way Andrew said it, I thought was really smart, is like, you know, we get the results, we digest the results as ourselves, we share the results out with the public, and a forum like that would be potentially could be attached to the, you know, whatever sort of official, you know, sort of agenda there is or whatever, right? Like, and then people who want to come comment would be commenting on that as well as just their thoughts in general. And then if you could do that sort of before Labor Day or something, you've satisfied a lot of public input and reaction to public input. And then we're, you know, a work session in early September to really figure out what we think about all of that input. and then, a voting session to basically decide which recommendations we're gonna put together. I mean, that seems to be kind of the flow of things in my head, at least.
Okay.
Cool. So I'll follow up with you, Eileen, and we'll figure out with Regina or Hillary, whoever, just to.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure
Real quick.
Regina's going to be on vacation then, but
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it may slip into early September. I mean, usually the council, when they're gone, all the council like hearings and stuff and, planning commission, all this stuff, I think they sort of take a little hiatus too, like the council. So in August, the council, until they start meeting again and new legislation is getting on the agenda, that then feeds the subcommittees and stuff. There's probably a window of time there where there might be some availability in the room. So it's worth an ask. Cool. So look for some emails from us about scheduling stuff, and if they suggest a different date, we can sort of come back to everyone real quick and see if it might work for folks, and hopefully with that sort of time frame, we can see what we can get going here. But I think this is really helpful from my perspective to sort of get a sense of trying to think about how to order these different events and getting everyone's input. So thank you for that. And it looks like, Eileen, we have a bunch of different follow-up to do. Scott, I'm going to follow up with you about MML and who to reach out there and how to ask these questions. Happy to do it, but happy to, if there's someone there you have a relationship with, that's great.
No, I was just willing to kind of pull together some of the data. I wasn't going to go to MML. I was
Cool.
just going to pull together
Even
some
better.
of the stats.
Cool. Great. And then we have some follow-up for Ashley in the Office of Law, some questions and about other legislation too. And then this whole scheduling issue. So cool. And anyone else have any other thoughts or things you want to dig into? Great. I guess we could entertain a motion to adjourn if we're ready to wrap it up.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? All in favor?